Hi friends! This week we are studying 2 Kings chapters 2 through 7. We're going to have a change here from one prophet to the next, and their names are very similar, which confuses people. One is Elijah, who we've been talking about, and then Elisha. Even pronouncing them is very similar. So I will do my best to pronunciate and let you know exactly when the changes take over. We begin with a story of Asherah, and Asherah is turning to Beelzebub. Now, this is interesting because we do this in our life. We sometimes turn to anybody but the one person who can help. God is the person that can help, and yet Asherah just refuses to do so. And why is that? We learn in verse 3, the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Arise, go up and meet the messenger out of the king of Samaria, and say unto them, Is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron?" We don't like the answer that we're going to get from God sometimes, so we will go where we think we're going to get the answer that we want to hear. It's not that we don't know that he's there, but sometimes we just don't like his answer. Well, Elijah prophesies that they are not going to make it out alive and that they need to make some changes. And they don't like this, and they go back to their king and tell him, and he says, "Who told you this?" It says in verse 8, and they answered him, "He was an hairy man, and girt with the girdle of leather about his loins." And they said unto him, "It is Elijah the Tishbite." That is all the description that they need. Similar to John the Baptist, there's no kingly apparel. He's hairy, and he has this leather about his loins. And probably also the fact that he gave him words that he doesn't like to hear. Now, the king sends up 50 men to Elijah. Elijah is sitting up above, and he wants to bring them up to him. In verse 9, "Thou man of God, the king hath said, Come down." And Elijah answers them and says, "Well, if I'm a man of God, then I'm going to show that to you by having 50 men be killed by fire." This is similar to the fire that we saw before, and Elijah will not come down. He will not move from his high place. And so they are consumed by fire. Well, he sends another 50 captains up, and this time he says, "Come quickly down." So he's heard that what happened, and he does not want that. So he says, "Please come quickly." And Elijah answered and said unto them in verse 12, "If I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And the God of the fire came down and did so. Now, a third time, he sends 50 captains. This captain has heard, and he comes and he falls upon his knees before Elijah and besought him in verse 13 and said unto him, "O man of God, I pray thee, let my life and the life of these 50 of thy servants be precious in thy sight." He's simply asking for his life and for the life of his 50. Please come down and talk to my master. In verse 15, and the angel of the Lord said unto Elijah, "Go down with him and be not afraid of him." And he arose and went down with him unto the king. And he leaves his message that he will surely die. Verse 17, so he died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken, and Joram reigned in his stead. Chapter 2 is the transition from Elijah to Elisha. And it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel." And Elisha said unto him, "As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee." So they went down to Bethel. Now, Bethel is the den of all evil. That's where they're headed into. We are reminded here of another relationship. Like Ruth and Naomi, I will go with you. I will go with you into whatever it takes. We also see that in Joseph Smith and his brother. Our work here goes beyond, and that God is ahead of us and he will lead us. There is hinting here at even a covenant relationship. I will not leave thee. Even in death cannot part us, because the Lord's will carry on. He says again in verse 4, "As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee." And so they came to Jericho. Elisha says again in verse 6, "I will not leave thee," and they went on together. Now it's getting close to time for Elijah to go. Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters, and they were divided hither and thither, and there were two, and they went over on dry ground. We have the crossing of the Jordan here, similar to the Red Sea on a much smaller scale. We also saw something similar with Moses and Joshua. So this is a miracle for two, that they just walk across this river. Verse 9, and when it came to pass, they were gone over, that Elijah said unto Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee." And Elijah said, "I pray thee a double portion of thy spirit to be upon me." He is not being prideful. He is saying, "Oh, my friend, I am so much less than thee. I'm going to need at least twice as much help as you do. I'm going to need at least twice as much spiritual strength as you do." Verse 10, and he said, "Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee, but if not, it shall not be so. It's like, well, you got a 50-50 chance here. Watch for me to go, and if you see me, then you'll know that that particular desire has been granted, and if not, then the Lord will provide for you another way. And then verse 11, a very dramatic exit for Elijah. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and a horse of fire, and parted them asunder. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind unto heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And he said unto him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes, and rent them into two pieces. And he took up the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. Verse 14, and he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he also had smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. Now, a couple things to unpack in these couple of verses. First, he looked into heaven, and he saw past Elijah. He focused where the power comes from, and that was not Elijah, that was the Lord. And then he takes his own clothes and he rents them into two pieces. He's leaving behind his own life, and in that act, he's also mourning. And it is also a preparation to prepare for this mantle that he has to take on. He's leaving behind who he was. He is sacrificing his old life, and he is willing to serve God, to give it all up for God. And that crossing then back and forth becomes symbolic of him leaving that old life behind, and of that transition from Elisha, the person, to Elisha, the prophet, the person who is willing to follow God at all costs. It is a whole new life. In fact, he stood at that bank of Jordan. He has faith to follow God. And then taking that mantle and talking to not Elijah, but the Lord God of Elisha. And then he walks and he does the same thing. So he is prepared to take on that mantle. In verse 15, we learn that there are witnesses to the passing of this mantle. And they come and they meet him, and they bow themselves down to him on the ground in verse 15. And they are worried about Elijah. In fact, they say, can we please send out 50 on a rescue mission to save him? And Elisha, of course, tells them, you don't need to. He has gone to heaven. And they say, we would feel so much better. We accept that you are the prophet, but we just want to make sure that he's okay. They're really not quite ready to accept this full change. Well, they go out, they search for 3 days, and they don't find him. So they come back. They are ready to follow Elijah. Now, Elijah is not Elijah. Elijah was very in your face and bold, but Elisha is calmer and he is more soft-spoken. And we will see that the Lord uses both people, and we are asked to be who we are, because that is the person who can bless people. And Elijah moves right into the same things that Elijah was doing. He is going to start with some miracles. And the men come to him in verse 19, as my Lord seeth, but water is not in the ground barren. Verse 20, and he said, bring me a new cruse, and put salt therein, and they brought it to him. They are going to the source of water. Now, salt is important because it was a preservative. It stopped the natural decay. It is this symbol of the covenant with the salt of the earth. So those are things that are important to hold on to as we are going through this miracle. In verse 21, and he sent forth unto the spring of the waters, again, that spot that we go to the source of water, and cast the salt in, and said, thus saith the Lord, I have healed these waters, and there shall not be from thence any more death or barren land. So the waters were healed unto this day, according to the sayings of Elisha, which he spake. And then in verse 23, we have another story starting. He gets up and he goes out by the way, and there come forth little children out of the city, and mocked them, and said unto him, go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. That idea of children there, we do need to know that they are not little children. These are teenagers. They are kind of being punks. But what they're telling him is that they don't believe him, and that their God is better than his God, that Elisha's God has no authority. One change that we see right away here is that Elijah, he would have cursed them and something immediate would have happened. It would have been a destructive death. And Elisha, he curses them and says, I'm going to leave it up to God to see what happens to you. In verse 24, and he turned back and looked at them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tare 42 children of them. Now, again, those little children, these are rebellious teenagers that are mocking and Mocking at the time was considered unacceptable, and we've seen many times that there is a capital crime and a capital punishment, and this would have been acceptable at the time. The other thing that we need to think about here is that hair is symbolic. Remember Samson, that hair comes from strength and has that power and authority, which is where we get the idea that when they're mocking him, they're like, oh, you old man, you don't have any power. Your God has no power here. Another thing that is interesting about this, who comes out of the woods but two she-bears? A she-bear, we would call her a mama bear. So God is then protecting his baby prophet. This is a new prophet and he just needs a little bit of extra help. So while it is a vicious way to die, this was the way that the Lord chose. And the chapter ends with him going up to Mount Carmel and then returns to Samaria. Chapter 3, we have Jeram, the son of Ahab, who is not that much better than his dad. And then we have Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat, remember, is trying to do what the Lord wants him to do. And they are at war. And Jehoshaphat, in verse 11, says, is there not here a prophet of the Lord that whom we can inquire of the Lord by him? So in other words, we need to know what the Lord says about this. And of course, there is. His name is Elisha. Verse 12, and Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. They understood his power and his authority, and they were willing to go to him. Verse 14 is one of those verses that reminds us we came with one person who is good and one person is bad, and the Lord loves effort, and he rewards them for Jehoshaphat, for his sake. Were it not that I regarded the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee nor see thee. But Jehoshaphat deserves God's love. He loves God, and so God will answer back to him. And the next thing he does is he invites the Lord through music. So he plays this minstrel and prepares the setting and the hearts for people, for the Lord to come. And he tells them what's going to happen, that they're going to have this war. The Moabites are going to be defeated, and then he offers them that they are going to be blessed with water for their animals. In verse 20, it says, and it came to pass in the morning when the meat offering was offered, that behold, there came water by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. And when all the Moabites heard that the king was come up to fight against them, they gathered all that were able to put in armor and upward and stood in the border. So they are blessing them here with things that they didn't even know that they needed. Now, we've seen this before, that the people were not prepared. They didn't think there was anybody coming to fight them. And so chapter 4, we meet another remarkable widow. And this is a story similar to the widow of Zarephath. She is also out of everything that she has. She goes in and she tells Elisha that there's a creditor come and that she has nothing left to give him. Now, there's a thought here that, remember Obadiah, the man who was caring for all those prophets, that this is his wife, but we don't really know for sure. But it's possible that she is alone and is in debt because they gave everything they had to protect those people. Either way, she is out of everything. Comes to Elisha and says, this man is going to take my 2 boys. You've got to help me. And Elisha says, what shall I do for me? And then he says, tell me what thou hast in the house. So what is your solution? He asks her first. He counsels with her. And what do you have? Because we can't multiply nothing. She says, I don't have anything except a pot of oil. And so Elisha tells her in verse 3, go get your pots and gather as many vessels as you can from all of your neighbors. Make sure that they are empty, and you need a lot of them. And then when you're come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and thy sons, and thou shalt pour out unto all the vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. And so she went and she did this. Now we learn a couple of things from this woman. 1, we need to ask for help. 2, we bring whatever we have and whoever we have. She brings her children with her. And then closing that door. The miracle is for you. It is not for all. So we need to be prepared. We need to trust. And then when the miracle comes, we need to be ready to keep part of the miracle for ourselves and part of the miracle for other people, depending on what the Lord wants us to do with it. So she does as she was asked. This is the miracle of filling empty things. She had all these vessels and she filled all of them with a little bit of oil that she had. And when they were all full, then she went out and she sold everything and paid off her debt. In verse 8, there's this phrase, it fell on a day. This is just an ordinary day. We see it again in verse 11. It fell on a day. This is a Tuesday. It is just an ordinary day. He goes out and he meets this great woman, and she constrains him to eat bread. And so it was that he oft passed by, he turned in to eat with her. So he eats there a lot. And she said unto her husband, Behold, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. So she's also a great woman, and she's a discerning woman. And she says, well, let's just make him a little room. And then whenever he comes, he can stay here. And in this room, she says in verse 10, on the wall, let there be set for him a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick. And it shall be that when he cometh, he shall turn in thither. So anytime he wants, this is just his room. We're going to set it aside for him. In verse 11, she says, And it fell on a day that he came hither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. So here's our friend Gehazi again. His servant called the Shunammite, and when he called for her, he stood before him. So he is thinking of her. He is wondering how he can bless her life. How can he repay this kindness? And he said unto him, Say unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. We see that phrase, careful, again with Martha and Jesus Christ, when he says, You have been careful with many things. And that is this same adoration and kindness and thoughtfulness that she is sharing for him. And then he says, What do you want? What is it that I can do for you? And she says, Nothing. I'm great. I have everything that I need. I live here among my own people. In verse 14, and he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Verily, she hath no child, and her husband is old. So they are also perceptive of the woman's needs and of things that she might need. And he, the prophet Elisha, said, Call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway. She is there ready to serve again. And he said, About this season, according to the time of thy life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thine handmaid. She's like, I am too old for this. You're so cute, but no, that's impossible. And we have to remember that we have a God who offers and delivers on impossible things. Verse 18, and when the child was grown, it fell on a day. So this is not random. It's not good or bad. It just what happened to be one day. And he went out with his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to the lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. Now, this woman is slightly different than our woman of Zarephath, our widow there. She had the bread. She created him space and gave him time and ability. She had those abilities to sustain the prophet, and she gave it to him. She recognized the power of God, and she came to her husband and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, Wherefore wilt thou go to him on this day? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It shall be well. Now at this time, he's saying, why would you go to him? He's not going to be around. This is not a day that he should be here. And her response is shalom. Shalom is a word meaning it is safe, it is well, it is happy, friendly, health, prosperity, prosper, rest, well, holy. All those words are in this one word, shalom, which is the word that they would use for well. So he's saying it's not possible, like life is already over, there's nothing that you can do. And she says, it'll be okay. It's going to be fine. There's peace here. There's rest here. And so she gets on the donkey and she goes forward because she doesn't know what to do, but she knows that God does. And she went and came unto the man of the Mount Carmel. And it came to pass when the man of God saw her afar off that he said to Gehazi, his servant, Behold, yonder is the Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her and to say to her, Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And then she answered, It is well. So again, that shalom. Notice that he is aware of her and that he asks after her and her husband and her child. So he knows that something isn't quite right and he is trying to figure out what it is. And her answer is, it's well. Now, it's not well. We know what happened, but she knows that God is going to take care of it. And she teaches us how to be like Jesus Christ. She teaches us what to do in terrible moments. One, her response is to have action. She has a plan. 2, she acts in faith. 3, she does works. She goes and she does these things. She has complete faith and trust. And she doesn't sit in her sorrow or her hardness. She doesn't get comfortable. Instead, she hastens for the Lord. And it's fitting that they're in Mount Carmel because this is a place of miracles. And in verse 27, when she came from the man of the hill, she caught him by his feet. But Gehazi came near and thrust her away. And the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her. And the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. He, in other words, is coming to mourn with her. I know something's wrong here. We've got to figure out how we can help this woman. Then said she in verse 28, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? My son is dead. You promised me a son. This is so painful. Let's fix this. Then he, Elijah, said unto Gehazi, gird up thy loins and take thy staff in thine hand and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not, and if thou salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. So he is saying, you are younger, you are faster, you can do this. Take my staff and act for me in behalf of God. And the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them, and laid the staff upon the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing, wherefore he went again to meet them, and told them, saying, the child is not awaked. And when Elisha came into the house, behold, the child was dead, and laid upon the bed. And he went in therefore, and shut the door unto them twain, and prayed unto the Lord. So it's just him. There are no watchers. And the woman, this is interesting too, because she refuses to leave the prophet. She could have rushed home. This is her child. But she says, no, I will stay with God. I'm going to stay here. Anything good that comes to me is because I am with God. And so this is where I am rooted. And she lived her whole life that way. Verse 34, and he went up and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. So literally he is laying himself out on top of the child so that their bodies are one on top of each other, and essentially just breathing that life into him again. Verse 35, and he returned and walked into the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times. And the child opened his eyes. So we have that idea of sneezing being an idea of being complete and life returning. And that's why you hear sometimes people saying that sneezing is your soul coming or going, is from this story. And he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. And so he called her. And when she was come into him, he said, take up thy son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself down to the ground and took up her son and went out. So she went in, she fell, she bowed, and then she took. She still is following all of this goodness and glory and this shalom, this peace. It is well. Everything that is happening is going to be okay. And Elijah learns that some miracles cannot be performed at a distance, and they can't take place through delegation. He learns that some things he has to do himself, that we must be present for. Now, before we move to the next miracle, let's take just a moment longer with this woman. We know that she is a type and a shadow of Jesus Christ. She is an analogy for him, this condensation of Christ, that he will come and personally enter into our space. And he will not give up. Just like her son was stretched out and laid upon multiple times, the Lord Jesus Christ will do that for us. She puts others before herself. She is content to accept God's will. She tells herself and others to be at peace, that idea of shalom, even in the midst of heartbreak and tragedy and loss and severe grieving. She is able to just say, shalom, it is well. She reassures others along the way, even when her own heart is breaking. And she looks for ways to make space, to bring in God, to provide life and sustenance for other people, and to move forward God's will. And these are characteristics which in our life, we could pick any one of those this week and work on just that one. She really, truly is a great woman and a true representative of Jesus Christ. All right, let's go back to Elisha. In verse 38, he is going to Gilgal, and there is a problem here. There's dearth in the land. Dearth means famine. So there's a famine going on again. And they're going to eat this mess of pottage. Now they gather all this food together, they put it in the pot, and it says in verse 40 that there is death in the pot and they could not eat it. And we are reminded in this miracle that Jesus takes death from us. And in verse 41, Elijah blesses it, and he says, okay, now it's safe for everybody to eat, and that death can do no harm. It says in the end of verse 41, and there was no harm in the pot. So we go from death to death can do no harm because of everlasting life. This is another miracle that points us directly to Jesus Christ. And there came a man from Baal-shishah and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and full ears of corn in the husk thereof. And he said, give unto thy people that they may eat. We are feeding the multitude from whatever we have. And again, we have this miracle, just like the loaves and the fishes. This is here as well. They're shocked because there are 100 people. He says, there's not going to be enough. And he says, yeah, there will be. Give it to thy people that all may eat. For thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and shall leave thereof. And just like the loaves and the fishes, they get to eat. In chapter 5, we meet Naaman. He is a Syrian. He comes to Elisha because he is a leper. Now, he's also a very wealthy man. And this story teaches us that God cares about each of his children. We learn about Naaman that he is a captain. He is a great man. He is very honorable. He's a mighty man. He is a man of valor. And he is a leper. It says in the end of verse 1, he's all these things. He is fighting against Israel, but he was a leper. And that is the one thing that he is known for instead of all those wonderful things. Verse 2, and the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover from his leprosy. And one went in and told the Lord, saying, thus saith the little maid that is in the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. So this cute little maid was probably a servant. She'd been taken from her home. And yet she says, oh, I know how we can heal this. You should go to my home. Also, we know that the king loves this man and that he has some high station or some relation with the king, that the king is like, yes, go, you need to be healed. And then look at all this that he takes with him. So he's incredibly wealthy. Well, he goes and he meets the prophet, and the prophet says, who do you think that I am? I am just a man. I can't make you come alive. Only God can do that in verse 7. Now, Naaman comes, and remember, he is this important person. And it says in verse 10, and Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again, that thou shalt be clean. Now, Naaman was wroth. One, this is really simple, but also, do you not know who I am? You would be so impressed with me if you would just come out. And Elisha's like, I don't need to be impressed with you. I can send others to do this. And in his anger, Naaman walks off and is just frustrated. He's not willing to do anything because how on earth could anybody treat him this way? In fact, in verse 12, and so he turned away in rage. So he is wroth and he has rage. And what is he really truly happy about? Except unmet expectations. And those rob us of our joy because we need to live our life that we expect faith. We expect our faith to have miracles, but we do not get to set the precedence of what those miracles are. Now, luckily for him, his servants are near, and they say unto him, well, if he asked you to do something miraculous, you would go do it. Why then will you not go and wash in the river? Verse 14, and he went down, so he humbled himself and dipped himself 7 times in the river Jordan, according to the sayings of the man of God. And his flesh came again like that of the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. He also had a change of heart here. He now has a heart of a little child. Well, he is overcome with joy. At the end of verse 5, he says, I pray thee take the blessings to thy servant. But he saith, as the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman says, okay, well, I will go then, and I'm going to return home, but I want to take some of your dirt with me. Will you let me take some dirt? Because I'm headed back to a place where there's a king and he worships, and I'm not going to be able to worship the way that you do here, and I want to be true to this God, and how can I do that? So let me take a little bit of dirt with me, and then I will make a little bit of Israel, and that way I can be true to my Lord and to my God. And of course, Elisha says, oh no, friend, you don't need that. The Lord will be with you wherever you go. So Naaman parts on his way, and Gehazi has a little bit of greed. We don't know if things are not great for him or if he is just kind of a greedy person, but he runs after him and says, oh, I heard you say that you would give my master some of these riches and this wealth. He makes up this story and he says that he has some visitors coming, and I heard you say that you had 10 clothes, but we only have 2 visitors coming. So could we get 2 clothes and enough to take care of these 2 people? In verse 23, Naaman thinks that this is beautiful, that he can repay this kindness, and said, "Be content to take 2 talents." And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags and 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon the 2 of his servants, and they bare him before him. Our friend Gehazi goes back to Elisha, and he lies again. Elisha asks him where he's been, and he says, "Thy servant went nowhere." And he says, "Oh, my friend, it's not what you took, but it's your heart. We have a real problem here." And he tells him that the leprosy that Naaman had is going to take over him. And in the end of 27, and he went out from his presence, a leper as white as snow, because things of the Lord cannot be bought, which is what Naaman was trying to do, and they cannot be sold, which was Gehazi tried to do. Chapter 6 is a chapter about challenges of growth, and there's also more miracles here. Elisha and the people are out, and they are building something, and the axe falls in the water. In verse 5 of chapter 6, "But as one of the felling a beam, an axe head fell into the water, and he cried and said, 'Alas, master, for it was browed.'" So they don't even have their own tools that they are taking here. And this is where we get the miracle of the axe head. It says, "And the man of God said, 'Where fell it?' And he shewed him the place. And he cut down a stick and cast it in thither, and the iron did swim." And so they get the axe head back. This is a cute little story that just is on their way, just an ordinary day that he is solving all these little miracles. And again, we see this miracle for the man who was worried about the axe head that he borrowed. The prophets at the time got involved in war a lot. I guess they had the opportunity to explain what was going to happen to those who would listen. And this is another experience with that. So the king of Syria wants to know what's going to happen, and so they call Elijah. So this little servant goes to talk to him, and while he is out, they become surrounded by all these men, all their enemies. In verse 16 is this famous one where Elisha says, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them." And David said that too. "Why would we be afraid? The Lord is on our side." And Elijah prayed and said, "Lord, I pray thee open his eyes," because the man was blind, "that he may see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Remember earlier where we were talking about we have to see the Lord's hand and the way that he loves us and the way that he does it? This is another reminder. Elisha saw the angels and the chariots of fire, but the other man did not. He saw the fear and he saw the humans around him. And this is one of those places in our life that we can stop and consider, where do we see the people immediately around us and not the angels that are constantly surrounding us? Elisha wants mercy. He does not want to fight and tells them that they are not enemies. And we learn how bad things are in Samaria in verse 25. There is this great famine that is happening, and things are so tight that a donkey's head is sold for 80 pieces of silver, and a fourth part of a cab of dung, of a dove's dung, is 5 pieces of silver. The dove dung would have been like the buffalo chips in pioneer times. It is used to cook like with a stick. And the people are aware that God, in verse 27, is their only hope. This next story also tells us how bad it is. It's a little bit of a wicked twist on the Solomon judging the 2 women with the children. Verse 28, "This woman said unto me, Give thy son that we may eat him today, and that we may eat my son tomorrow." 29, "So we boiled my son and did eat him. And I said unto her on the next day, Give thy son that we may eat him. But she hath hid them." In verse 30, "It came to pass that the king heard these words of the women, that he rent his clothes, and he passed upon the well. And the people looked, and beheld, he had a sackcloth upon his flesh." He is utterly devastated, just absolute sorrow over the consequences. And he blames Elisha for the way that his people are living. We don't know how he actually solves this one, but he is angry with Elisha. That's where it leaves us. Chapter 7 is our last chapter for today. We have Elijah who captures people and sends them back to the king and tells him that God is showing mercy and love, and that there's going to be a change of supply and demand. There are these 4 lepers in verse 4 who think that they're going to die. They can't go into the city. There's nowhere for them to go to get food. And if we go into the city, then we're going to be killed. But if we don't, we're going to die as well. It says in verse 5, "And they rose up in the twilight and go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come up to the utmost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there." For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, when the noise had a great host. And they said to one another, Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the king of the Hittites and the king of the Egyptians to come upon us. Wherefore they rose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents and their horses, everything. So this is the miracle of that psychological warfare. Remember earlier when we had the sound of the clay pots being banged, and then they had fire throughout, and the people thought that they were being attacked from all sides and they gave up? Well, the same thing is happening here. Everybody's gone. There's nothing there to stop them. And so what do the lepers do? But they come and they take their fill. They eat as much as they can. They go in and they take all of their stuff. And this is where we see first this famine has changed. Now there is plenty of abundance of food and of supplies. In fact, there's a whole trail of supplies, is what we're told. The king and his people go out and they check this to see if it's real. And it says in verse 16, and the people went out and spoiled the tents of the Syrians. So a measure of fine flour was sold at a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. And then we have the final prophecy being fulfilled here at the end of the chapter. The king is sending his people out to go and get things, and he becomes trampled to death by the people as they are in this rush to go and get their food. We have had a ton of lessons this week from a God of miracles for nations and a God of miracles for one or two. We have the Lord blessing us and sending us love in so many ways. And even our King who just died, we have warnings of things that are to come if we do not change our ways. The Lord will do anything in his power to show us his love for us and bring us home to him, because he is in relentless pursuit of us. And that is our challenge for this week, is to look around and see, where is he in relentless pursuit in your life? What miracles is he putting in your path for your family, for yourself, for miracles that you didn't even see and that your eyes can be open to? I hope you have a great week. I'll see you soon.